The axis of evil, the direction the universe was not supposed to have. Intro, a direction that should not exist. The universe was never supposed to have a direction, not a preferred axis, not a cosmic alignment, not a hidden line stretching across existence. Because according to everything we thought we knew, the universe should look the same, no matter where you look. But it doesn't. And when scientists discovered this, they didn't celebrate, they hesitated because what they found was something the universe was never supposed to have, a direction. Chapter 1, The Perfectly Imperfect Universe. For decades, one assumption guided cosmology above all others, the idea that the universe is isotropic, meaning that on large scale it looked the same in every direction, and this assumption is not just a convenience, it is a foundation, because without it, the equation that describe cosmic expansion, the formation of galaxies, and the behavior of radiation would become far more complex, and for a long time, observations seem to confirm this assumption, because when scientists mapped the cosmic microwave background, they found a nearly uniform field of radiation, a faint glow that filled the universe and appeared to be the same in every direction. And this uniformity became one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting the standard model of cosmology because it suggested that the universe began in a highly uniform state and has evolved in a way that preserved that large-scale symmetry, but hidden within that uniformity were tiny fluctuations, small variation in temperature that would later grow into galaxies and clusters, and at first, these fluctuations appear random, consistent with the idea of a universe without a preferred direction, until someone looked closer. Chapter 2, The Discovery No One Expected. When scientists began analyzing the cosmic microwave background in greater detail, particularly within data from satellites like WMAP and later Planck, they noticed something strange, not in the overall structure, but in the alignment of the largest fluctuation, because instead of being randomly oriented, these fluctuations appeared to line up along a specific axis, a direction that extended across the observable universe, and this was unexpected, because there is no known mechanism that should produce such a large-scale alignment. And at first, it was dismissed as a statistical anomaly, a coincidence that would disappear with better data, but as the data improved, the alignment remained, and not only that, it became more pronounced, more difficult to ignore, and this led to the emergence of a term that was both descriptive and unsettling, the the axis of evil, a name that reflected not just the alignment itself, but the discomfort it created among scientists who realized that this phenomenon did not fit within the existing framework of cosmology. Chapter 3, The Problem with Direction. The existence of a preferred direction in the universe creates a fundamental problem because it violates the principle of isotropy, the idea that the universe should be the same in all directions. And this principle is deeply embedded in our understanding of cosmology because it simplifies the equation that describes the universe and aligns with the idea that there is nothing special about our position or orientation. But if the axis of evil is real, then this assumption may be incomplete because it suggests that the universe does have a preferred orientation, a large-scale structure that defines a specific direction, and this raises a series of questions. Where does this direction come from? What caused it? And what does it mean for our understanding of the universe? And these questions are not easy to answer because they challenge the foundation of the model we use, forcing scientists to consider possibility that extend beyond conventional explanation. Chapter 4: Error or something else. At first, the simplest explanation was the alignment was not real, that is, was the result of measurement errors, data processing artifacts, or contamination from local sources such as Milky Way, and scientists spent years attempting to identify and remove these potential sources of error, refining their models, improving their instruments, and reanalyzing the data. But even after accounting for these factors, the alignments persisted, and this persistence made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the axis of evil as a mere anomaly, because true errors tend to disappear when data improves. But this is not as a result, as a result, the possibility that the alignment reflects a real feature of the universe became harder to ignore, and with that possibility came a deeper level of uncertainty. Because if the alignment was real, and with that possibility came a deeper level of uncertainty, because if the alignment is real, then it must have a cost, and that cost must be something that is not currently included in our standard models of cosmology. Chapter 5: the alignment that refused to disappear. As more datasets were analyzed, and cross-checked across different missions, instruments, and independent research teams, one settling fact became impossible to ignore: the alignment was not fading. It was not weakening. It was not behaving like a statistical accident that disappears under scrutiny. Instead, it persisted with a consistency that forced scientists to take it seriously, because even after removing known sources of contamination such as galactic foreground noise, instrument bias, and data processing artifacts, the same large-scale directional alignment continued to appear, and this persistence transformed the axis of evil from a curiosity into a problem, not because it provided answer, but because it resisted explanation. And in science, what refuses to disappear often becomes more important than what can be easily explained, because it suggests that there is something deeper at work, something that current models have not yet accounted for. And within this persistence lay the beginning of a much more profound question, not just whether the universe had a direction, but why that direction exists at all. Chapter 6: The Scale That Should Be Random. What made the axis of evil particularly disturbing was not just its existence, but the scale at which it appeared, because the alignment was observed in the largest possible structures of the observable universe, the lowest multiple moments of the cosmic microwave background, representing fluctuations that span billions of light years. And according to the standard model of cosmology, structures at this scale should be completely random because they originate from quantum fluctuations spread across the universe during inflation. And these fluctuations are expected to be isotropic, evenly distributed in all directions without any preferred orientation. And yet, what the data show was the opposite: a coherent across scale so vast that it challenged the very mechanism that is supposed to produce randomness, and this contradiction created a tension between observation and theory, because either the data was wrong or the theory was incomplete, and neither option was countable. Chapter 7: The Possibility of a Cosmic Imprint. One of the first serious explanations considered was the That the alignment might be the result of some physical process that occurred during the early universe, something that left an imprint on the cosmic microwave background that persisted to the present day. And this idea led to investigation into anisotropic models of inflation, where the expansion of the universe might not have been perfectly uniform models of inflation, where the expansion of the universe that might not have been perfectly uniform in all directions, but instead slightly biased, creating a preferred axis that would be later be reflected in the distribution of radiation, and why such models could, in principle, produce an alignment. They require modification to the standard theory of inflation, modification that introduce new parameters and assumptions. And while these models were mathematically possible, they lack independent evidence, and this made them difficult to accept as definitive explanation because they solve one problem while creating others, and in doing so, they highlighted a recurring theme in the investigation that every attempt to explain the axis of evil requires stepping beyond the established framework of cosmology. Chapter 8, The Shadow of Something Beyond the Horizon. As more conventional explanations struggled to account for the alignment, attention began to shift toward more radical possibility, including the idea that the axis of evil might be influenced by structures beyond the observable universe, regions of space that we cannot see but that could still exert an effect on the cosmic microwave background through gravitational or geometric interaction. And this idea is not entirely without precedent because the observable universe is only a portion of a much larger whole, and there's no reason to assume that conditions beyond our horizon are identical to those within it. And if there are large-scale structures or anisotropies beyond what we can observe, they could, in theory, influence the distribution of radiation in ways that create a preferred direction. And while this explanation remains speculative, it introduces a profound implication that what we observe as the structure of the universe may be influenced by regions that we will never directly see, and that the axis of evil may be one of the few clues pointing toward that hidden truth. Chapter 9, The Possibility of a Rotating Universe. Another idea that emerged, one that had existed in theoretical physics for decades but had never been widely accepted, is the possibility that the universe itself might have a global rotation, not in the sense of galaxies rotating within it, but the entire fabric of spacetime have a slight rotational component, and such a rotation could, in principle, create a preferred axis, a direction along which certain properties of the universe align. And why this idea is intriguing, it faces significant challenges because current observation place very tight constraints on any large-scale rotation, and the effects required to produce the axis of evil would need to be extremely subtle, yet still detectable. And while some models suggest that such rotation could exist without violating known constraints, there is no direct evidence supporting it. And with other explanations, it remains a possibility that raises as many questions as it answers. Chapter 10, the data that doesn't fit the model. As the list of possible explanation grew, so did the realization that none of them fully accounted for the observed alignment without introducing a new complexities, and this led to a deeper and more uncomfortable conclusion that the problem might not lie in the data, but in the model itself, that the assumption underlying modern cosmology, particularly the assumption of isotropy, might not be as absolute as previously believed, and this and this possibility is difficult to accept because it challenges one of the foundational principles that had been guided cosmological research for decades. But at the same time, science advances by confronting anomalies, by questioning assumptions, and by refining models to better match observation. And in this sense, the axis of evil becomes more than just an anomaly. It becomes a test of whether our current understanding of the universe is complete, or whether it needs to be expanded to account for phenomena that were not anticipated. Chapter 11. The shift from error to structure. At a certain point, the conversation changed, subtly but significantly, because the axis of evil was no longer being treated as a potential error to be eliminated, but as a feature to understood. And this shift marked a turning point in the investigation, because it opened the door to new ways of thinking about the universe, ways that do not assume perfect symmetry at all scales, and instead consider the possibility that the universe may have underlying structures or orientation that are not immediately visible, but still influence its behavior. And within this new perspective, the alignment becomes not a problem to be solved, but a clue, a hint that the universe may be more complex, more structured, and more directional than we had previously believed. Chapter 12. The beginning of a deeper question. And as this new perspective takes hold, a deeper question begins to emerge, one that goes beyond the specifics of the axis of evil and into the nature of reality itself. Because if the universe has a preferred direction, if it is not perfectly isotropic, then what does that say about its origin, about the condition that gave rise to it, and about the principles that govern its evolution? And this question does not have a simple answer, but it marks the beginning of a new phase in the investigation, one that moves beyond trying to explain a single anomaly and toward understanding what that anomaly reveals about the structure of the universe as a whole. And within that shift lies in the true significance of the axis of evil, not as an isolated phenomenon, but as a doorway into a deeper and more complex understanding of the cosmos. Chapter 13. The universe that should not be biased. As the implication of the axis of evil became harder to ignore, one uncomfortable idea began to take hold, the idea that the universe might not be as neutral as we always assume, because the principle of isotropy is not just a technical detail. It is a philosophical foundation. It reflects the idea that there is nothing special about any direction in the universe, that the laws of physics operate the same way everywhere, and that the universe has no inherent preference, but if a preferred axis exists, even at the largest scales, then this assumption is no longer absolute, and that introduces a bias, not in the data, but in reality itself, a directional bias that suggests that the universe may have an underlying structure or orientation that we have not yet fully understood, and this idea is deeply unsettling because it implies that the universe is not entirely random in its large scale structure, that there may be patterns or alignments that reflect deeper conditions that were present at the very beginning and have persisted throughout cosmic history, shaping the universe in ways that are only now become visible. Chapter 14. The possibility of a cosmic frame. If the universe had a preferred direction, then it becomes possible to consider that there may exist a kind of cosmic reference frame, not in the classical sense of absolute space, but in the sense of a large-scale orientation embedded within the structure of space-time itself. And such a frame would not necessarily be detectable through local measurement, but it could manifest in global patterns, in the alignment of fluctuation, in the distribution of radiation, and the behavior of structure at the largest scales. And this idea challenges one of the core principles of relativity, the idea that there is no preferred frame of reference, because if a cosmic frame exists, even a subtle form, then it introduces a hierarchy. A structure that defines a particular orientation as distinct from others, and why this does not necessarily violate the laws of physics as we understand them. It does suggest that there may be additional layers of structure that are not captured by current models, layers that become apparent only when we look at the universe as a whole. Chapter 15, The Shadow of Initial Conditions. As scientists attempted to trace the origin of this alignment, attention turned once again to the earliest moment of the universe, because any large-scale structure observed today must have originated from initial condition. And if the axis of evil reflects a real feature of the universe, then it must be rooted in those initial conditions, in the state of the universe at or near the moment of its birth. And this raises a profound possibility that the universe was not born in a perfectly symmetric state, that there that there may have been asymmetries, directional features, or structure present from the very beginning. And if this is true, then it challenges the assumption that inflation erased all initial irregularities, replacing them with a uniform and isotropic distribution, because it suggests that some features may have survived, imprinting themselves on the universe in ways that persist to this day. And within this context, the axis of evil become not just an anomaly, but a relic, a trace of the universe's origin, a clue about the conditions that existed before the universe became what we can observe today. Chapter 16, The Possibility of a Multiverse Interaction. As the research of explanation expanded, some scientists began to consider even more radical possibility, including the idea that the alignment might be the result of an interaction with another universe, a collision or overlap between our universe and another region of spacetime during the early stages of cosmic inflation, and such an interaction could, in theory, introduce a directional bias, a large-scale feature that would later be reflected in the cosmic microwave background. And why this idea remains speculative, it had gained attention because it provides a mechanism that could produce the observed alignment without requiring modification to the internal dynamics of our universe. Instead of attributing to the instead of attributing the effect of instead of attributing to the effect to an external influence, and this possibility, while difficult to test, highlights the extent to which the axis of evil challenges conventional thinking, because it forces scientists to consider explanations that extend beyond the observable universe into realms that are not directly accessible but still influence what we observe. Chapter 17, The Fear of Breaking the Model. At this stage, the investigation enters a more delicate phase, because the implications of the axis of evil are not just scientific, they are structural. They threaten to destabilize the framework that had they threaten to destabilize the framework that has successfully explained a wide range of cosmological phenomena, and this creates a tension within the scientific community between the desire to preserve a model that works and the need to account for observations that do not fit within it. And this tension is not unique to this problem. It had appeared throughout the history of science, and whenever new data challenges established theory, but in this case, the scale of the challenge is particularly significant because it involves the largest structures in the universe and the principles that govern them, and it leads to a cautious approach, a reluctance to draw definitive conclusion, and a focus on gathering more data, refining models, and exploring alternative explanation. But at the same time, the persistence of the alignment ensures that the problem cannot be ignored, and it remains a central question in cosmology, one that must eventually be addressed. Chapter 18: The shift from anomaly to clue. As the discussion evolves, a subtle but important shift takes place. The axis of evil is no longer treated solely as an anomaly, something that deviates from expectations, but as a clue, something that may point toward a deeper understanding of the universe. And this shift changes the way the problem is approached. Because instead of trying to eliminate the alignment or explain it away, scientists begin to consider what it might be telling us, what underlying structure or principle it might reveal, and within this perspective, the alignment becomes a starting point, a piece of evidence that can guide further investigation. And this approach reflects a broader principle in science, that anomalies often lead to breakthroughs, that what does not fit within existing models can provide the key to developing new ones. And in this sense, the axis of evil may represent not a flaw in our understanding, but an opportunity to expand it. Chapter 19: The possibility that the universe is not isotropic. At the core of all these considerations lies a fundamental question, one that has profound implications for cosmology. What if the universe is not isotropic, not perfectly uniform in all directions? And why this idea may seem radical, it is not entirely inconsistent with observation, because isotropy has always been an approximation, a principle that holds true within certain limits but may not be absolute. And if the axis of evil is a real feature, then it suggests that this approximation may break down at the larger scales, revealing a universe that has subtle directional property that are not immediately visible but become apparent to careful analysis of large-scale data. And this possibility does not invalidate the standard model, but it does suggest that it may need to be refined, extended, or modified to account for this feature, to account for these features. And in doing so, it opens the door to a more nuanced understanding of the universe, one that acknowledges both its uniformity and its structure. Chapter 20: The Edge of Understanding. As we reach the edge of what can be explained within current frameworks, the axis of evil remains not fully understood, not fully explained, but clearly present, a feature of the universe that resists simple interpretation. And this resistance is what makes it so important, because it highlights the limits of our current understanding and points toward the need for new ideas, new models, and new ways of thinking about the universe. And in this sense, the axis of evil is not just a problem, it is a boundary, a point at which our knowledge meets the unknown. And beyond that boundary lies the possibility of deeper insights, new discoveries, and more complete understanding of the cosmos. Chapter 21: The possibility that the universe has a memory of direction. As the investigation approached its deepest level, one idea began to surface with increasing intensity, not because it was proven, but because it refused to disappear. The possibility that the universe may carry a memory of direction, not in the conscious sense, but in the structural sense, a, radi- a, resi- a residual imprint from its early state that defines a subtle orientation across the largest scales. And if this is true, then the axis of evil is not an anomaly, but a remnant, a trace of the condition that existed at the very beginning. And this idea challenges the assumption that inflation erased all initial structures, because it suggests that somehow may because it suggests that something may have survived, something that continues to influence the universe even now. And within this framework, the alignment is not random, it is inherited, a feature passed forward from the earliest phase of the from the earliest phase of cosmic evolution, and this introduces a new way of thinking about the universe, not as a system that starts from perfect symmetry, but as one that carries forward aspects of its origin, shaping its structure in ways that are only visible at the larger scales. Chapter 22. The universe may not be as simple as we thought. For decades, cosmology has relied on simplifying assumptions, treating the universe as uniform, isotropic, and governed by relatively simple princi- principles at large scales. And these assumptions have been incredibly successful, allowing scientists to build models that accurately describe a wide range of observations. But the axis of evil suggests that this simplicity may be incomplete. That beneath the in, that beneath the apparent uniformity lies a deeper complexity, a structure that va- introduces subtle variation in direction or and orientation. And this does not mean that the standard model is wrong, but it does mean that it may be incomplete, that there may be additional layers of structure that have not yet been fully incorporated into our understanding. And this realization is both challenging and exciting because it opens the door to new theory, new models, and new ways of thinking about the universe, ways that go beyond the assumption of perfect symmetry and explore the possibility of a more structured cosmos. Chapter 23. The final question. Why this direction? At the core of axis of evil lies a question that has no easy answer, a question that goes beyond measurement and into meaning. Why this direction? Why should the universe align in one particular way rather than another? And this question is difficult because it touches on the limits of scientific explanation. Because science can describe how things happen, it can model processes, identify patterns, and test hypotheses. But when it comes to why a particular direction exists, the answer may not lie in the single mechanism. It may be embedded in the initial conditions of the universe itself, conditions that are not directly accessible, and this raises the possibility that some aspects of the universe may be contingent, shaped by factors that are not fully determined by known laws. And if that is the case, then the axis of evil may be represent one of those aspects, a feature that reflects the specific way in which our universe came into existence, rather than a universal property that must exist in all possible universes. Chapter 24. The possibility that we are seeing a cosmic perspective effect. Another idea that is both subtle and deeply intriguing is the axis of evil may not represent a physical structure of in the universe, but rather a perspective effect, a result of the way we observe the universe from our particular position within it. And this idea suggests that the alignment might be influenced by our location, our motion, or our frame of reference, creating the appearance of a preferred direction, even if the universe itself is more symmetric. And while this explanation has been explored, it has not fully resolved the alignment because the effect persists even after accounting for known observational biases. But it highlights an important point that our perspective plays a role in how we interpret the universe, and that understanding cosmic phenomena requires careful consideration of both the data and the context in which it is observed. Chapter 25. The Edge of Cosmic Reality. As all these possibilities converge, We find ourselves at the edge of cosmic reality, a place where observation, theory, and interpretation meet, and where the limits of our understanding become clear, because the axis of evil does not provide a definitive answer. It does not result into a single explanation, but it does reveal something important, that the universe is not fully may require new ways of thinking, new models, and perhaps even new principles of physics. And this realization is not a failure, it is a sign of progress because it shows that because it shows that there is still more to discover, more to understand, and that the universe continues to challenge us in ways that push the boundary of knowledge. Chapter 26: The possibility of a deeper cosmic field. As the idea of persistence took hold, some researchers began to consider whether the alignment might be connected to a deeper field, something that permeates the universe in a way that is not directly observable but still influences its structure, similar in concept to dark energy or dark matter, but distinct in its effect because instead of shaping expansion or clustering, it would defy orientation, creating a subtle directional bias across space. And while these ideas remain highly speculative, it provides a framework in which the axis of evil is not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a larger system, a system in which certain properties of the universe are governed by fields that extend beyond what we can directly detect. And within this framework, the alignment is not something that needs to be explained away. It is something that needs to be understood as part of a broader structure, a structure that may include aspects of reality that we are currently that are currently beyond our observational reach. Chapter 27: The possibility that space itself is not symmetric. Another interpretation, one that challenges assumptions at the most fundamental level, is that space itself may not be perfectly symmetric, that the geometry of the universe at the larger scales may include anisotrophies, subtle variation in how space is structured in different directions. And if this is true, then the axis of evil could be a manifestation of this underlying asymmetry, a reflection of the fact that the universe is not perfectly uniform, not perfectly balanced, but instead had a structure that favors certain orientations. And this idea has profound implication because it suggests that the laws of physics, while consistent colloquially, may operate within a larger framework that is not entirely uniform, and that understanding this framework may require rethinking some of the assumptions that have guided cosmology for decades. Chapter 28: The final possibility. It was never random. At the deepest level of the investigation, one final possibility emerges, one that is both simple and deeply unsettling: the possibility that the universe was never random, that the apparent randomness we observe is only an approximation, a simplification that works within certain limits, but does not capture the full complexity of of reality. And if this is true, then the axis of evil is not an anomaly, it is a clue, a hint that the universe has underlying patterns, structures, or principles that are not immediately visible but that influence its behavior at the larger scales. And the idea does not imply design or intention, but it does suggest that the universe may be more ordered, more structured, and more directional than we have previously believed, and that the randomness we observe may be only part of a larger, more complex system. Chapter 29: The realization that changes the question. And then, at the very end, the question itself begins to change because it is no longer just about whether the axis of evil is real or what caused it, but about what it means for our understanding of the universe. Because if the universe had a direction, if it is not perfectly isotropic, if it contains structures that extend beyond our current models, then the fundamental assumption that underpin cosmology may need to be reconsidered. And this does not invalidate what we know, but it expands it. It opens the door to new possibilities, new questions, and new ways of thinking about the cosmos. And within this shift lies the true significance of the axis of evil, not as a problem to be solved, but as a catalyst for deeper understanding. Chapter 30. The possibility that the universe is slightly broken. At the furthest edge of interpretation, one uncomfortable idea begins to form, not as a conclusion but as a lingering possibility that cannot be ignored. The idea that the universe may not be perfectly constructed in the way we have always assumed, not broken in the sense of chaos or instability, but imperfect in a subtle and measurable way, an imperfection that reveals itself only at the largest scale, where the assumption of symmetry begins to fail, and within this imperfection lies the existence of evil, not as an anomaly to be corrected, but as a feature that exposes a small but significant deviation from what we expect reality to be. And this deviation is not dramatic. It does not it does not disrupt the formation of galaxies or law of physics, but it is enough to suggest that the universe may carry slight irregularities, small biases that we have been present since its earliest moments, and this idea is unsettling because it's challenging the notion of of a perfectly uniform cosmos, replacing it with something more complex, something that includes imperfections as parts of its fundamental structure. Chapter 31. The idea that symmetry was never complete. For decades, symmetry has been one of the guiding principles of physics, a concept that suggests that the laws of nature are balanced, uniform, and consistent across all directions and scales. But the axis of evil introduces the possibility that this symmetry may not be complete, that there may be small but meaningful deviations that reflect deeper conditions. And if this is true, then the symmetry we observe is not absolute, but approximate, a large-scale pattern that holds the truth within certain limits, but breaks down when examined closely enough. And this idea aligns with other discovery in physics, where perfect symmetry often gives way to slight asymmetries that have profound consequences, and within this context, the axis of evil may be one such asymmetry, a feature that reveals the limits of symmetry and points toward a more nuanced understanding of the universe. Chapter 32. The possibility of a cosmic oriented view. As scientists attempt to reconcile these ideas, a new conceptual firework begins to emerge, one in which the universe may contain a form of orientation, not as a fixed direction imposed externally, but as a property that arises from its internal structure, a kind of cosmic orientation field that defines subtle directional preferences across space. And while this idea is still highly theoretical, it provides a way to think about the axis of evil not as an isolated alignment, but as part of a broader system, a system in which direction is an intrinsic property of the universe, much like energy or curvature. And within this framework, the alignment is not something that needs to be explained away. It is something that needs to be understood as part of the universe's fundamental structure. And this perspective opens the door to new theories that explore how such a field might arise, how it might evolve, and how it might influence the behavior of the universe at large scales. Chapter 20, Chapter 33. The possibility that we are seeing only on one side of the structure. Another perspective, one that becomes increasingly compelling as the investigation deepens, is that is that what we observe may be only a partial view of a much larger structure, that the axis of evil is not the full pattern, but a projection, a visible fragment of something more complex that extends beyond our observable horizon. And if this is true, then the alignment we see may be the result of interaction or structures that we cannot fully access, structures that lie beyond the limits of observation, but still influence what we can detect. And this idea is consistent with the understanding that the observable universe is only a portion of a much larger whole, and that the conditions beyond our horizon may differ in ways that are not directly measurable. And within this context, the axis of evil becomes a clue, a hint of a larger structure that we are only partially able to perceive. Rồi. Chapter 34, the final shift from question to perspective. At this stage, the nature of the investigation changes once again because it becomes clear that the axis of evil may not have a single definitive explanation, that it may not result into a simple cause or mechanism, and instead it becomes a perspective, a way of looking at the universe that emphasizes its complexity, its subtle structure, and its resistance to complete understanding. And within this perspective, the alignment is not a problem to be solved, but a feature to be explored, a phenomenon that reveals the limits of our current models and points toward new ways of thinking about the cosmos. And this shift is important because it moves the focus from trying to eliminate the anomaly to understand what it reveals about the universe as a whole.